right, well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Glad you guys are here today. It's the first Sunday in May, so New York promptly gets us rain and cold. And I think the high tomorrow is supposed to be 47. This is not May weather. I'm not sure what's wrong with this place. But anyway, glad you guys are here. We are beginning a brand new series today titled David. And this is about a famous king in the history of Israel, maybe the most famous king in the history of Israel. And he did some extraordinary things in his life. He was a shepherd, meaning that he went from one extreme to the other with his life. He was a humble shepherd whose job was to make sure that sheep were safe, which I'm sure is a difficult job, but not as important of a job as the king. And he went on to become so he started out as a shepherd, and he went on to become a giant slayer. You may have heard that story, and if you haven't, you're going to hear it maybe from a different perspective than you've heard it today. And he became a great warrior for the nation of Israel. Then he went on to become a king, and probably the most famous and the best king that Israel ever had. And he also was a poet and a songwriter. That book in your Bible that looks like the Psalms, right? It's kind of right in the middle of it, the big one. David wrote a lot of that, and he was able to kind of portray his heart and his mindset and his attitude about life through a lot of his writing. It's just so phenomenal and so incredible. And so what we're going to do over the next few weeks here in May is that we are going to learn a little bit from his life that I think has incredible value even today. We're going to be talking about some stories that are almost 3,000 years old, yet still have incredible value to us today if we will apply it to our lives. And there is a principle or an assumption that we're going to learn today that David lived his life by, and it changed everything for him, but not just for him, but for all the people around him. And so we're going to learn how David kind of went from being the shepherd, the humble, I'm taking care of my sheep, to a incredible warrior and like an instant internet sensation overnight. Okay? And it happened around the 11th century BC, so we got to go way back to ancient times. And David is about to find himself on a battlefield that he had no business being on, that he wasn't there to be a part of the battle, that he's about to find himself on this battlefield in ancient warfare. Now, I need to start by telling you, ancient warfare was very different than you may think or you may realize. It was certainly very different than modern warfare. David lived in an incredibly violent time in the history of the world. An incredibly violent time, an incredibly brutal time in the history of the world. That's why when you read the Old Testament and you go back and you start seeing some of the things that happened, and you're like, why were there so many groups of people attacking each other? Why were nations always rising up? And why were there so many different empires? It seemed like when one empire ended, another empire began. You ever notice that? Right? And that's because the world was just kind of constantly trying to expand their borders. Every nation, every king wanted more land, more people, and so they were constantly trying to fight each other to extend their territory. And David was right in the middle of this ancient warfare time. And when you would find yourself on a battlefield, you weren't like in modern warfare, people kill from a distance. It's still terrible, it's still brutal, but you kill from a distance with bullets and with missiles. But in David's day, you killed face to face with each other. Like you had a shield and you had a sword and you were able to stare into the eyes of the person that you were fighting with. You kind of knew what they had for breakfast that day. You knew what color their eyes were. Right? I mean, it was intense, it was brutal, it was devastating. And if you were lucky enough to survive the battle, they say that the adrenaline was pumping so hard, and like it's so hard for us to really gauge this, because like our views of ancient warfare have been really watered down by Hollywood, right? You ever seen Braveheart or Gladiator, right? Nobody wants to admit to that in church, but it's they kind of water down what this ancient warfare looks like because we don't really get the smell or the sound or the feeling of fear that every single soldier had on that battlefield. And they say that the adrenaline would pump so hard for a person that was going out fighting that if you did get wounded and you were able to walk off the field, that you would have to wait until after the battle to even determine what your wounds were and how bad you were hurt, because the adrenaline was pumping so bad. And that if you were wounded and you did get cut or punctured in the battle, they say that chances are, even if you did get the bleeding to stop, that you would probably, most likely, die of an infection days or weeks later. And they say that if the person beside you, to your right or to your left, lost courage and decided that they were going to run and get away from the battle, that almost certainly meant your death on the battlefield, because there was nobody beside you to protect you, to guard your right or to your left. And if you were fighting in battle and you did fall, you were either seriously injured and couldn't walk, or you were killed, there would be nobody to come and get your body off the battlefield. They would be eaten by the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Now, isn't that the most incredible intro to a sermon you've ever heard? Wow. Welcome to Awaken Church. But I wanted you to hear that because I want you to understand what David is about to walk into when he steps onto a battlefield in a place that he shouldn't have been. But before we get to David's part of the story, we need to actually go backwards a little bit and see what actually set this up. So if you have your Bible, we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 17, and we're going to be looking at a scene from history that is just like what we just talked about. 1 Samuel chapter 17, we're going to start with verse 1. It says this: Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Socoh in Judah. And they pitched camp at Ephes-Dammim between Socoh and Ezekiel. I want you to know we don't live in these towns. It'd be so hard to tell people where to go. Now, Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. Saul was the first king of Israel. He was the king. He was the first king that Israel had ever had. The Philistines occupied one hill, and the Israelites another, with a valley between them. Just make sure that we all understand what's going on. There's two big hills. You've got one army of the Philistines who is trying desperately to expand their borders. They want to go into this land that God had promised to the nation of Israel. So they're on one hill. And you've got Israel on the other hill. And they go down into this valley and they form a line. Because that's what you do. You form a shield line to stop the other people from coming and attacking you. And so they're down in this valley, and they're ready to stop the onslaught that's about to happen from this Philistine nation. But then something happens that they did not expect, and they had no warning for. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. That means he was 9.5 feet tall, which is taller than anybody that you've ever seen or met before. And he was not only tall, he was strong. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. And just so that you don't have to do the math in your head, it's about 150 pounds of body armor. Imagine putting on a 150-pound vest and trying to walk around all day, much less go to battle and fight. And on his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod. That means it was really, really big, and it had an iron point weighed 600 shekels. And just again, so you don't have to do the math, that's 15 pounds. And his shield bearer went ahead of him. Now, what that means is that he had a really long spear that had an incredibly heavy head to it. And what he would do is when his shield bearers would go in front of him, they would form a line. He was so tall, he was so big, he could stand behind that line without any danger, reach over the top with his incredible length with his long spear, and just attack anybody that came up. And he was a professional soldier, a professional killer. Nobody wanted to see Goliath walk out onto the battlefield this day. But this is what happens. He walks out with all of his stuff on. And he stood and he shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not the servants of Saul?" Now, that's a really, really important line. That's what they were known as at this point. They were known as a nation that was led by Saul. He said, "Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. We will become your slaves." But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects. You will become our slaves, and you will serve us. Now, Israel, they had done this before. They didn't want to do it again. They didn't want to go back. And the Philistines said, this day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. Now, when they heard this, you can imagine the reaction that they had. Right? All of them were ready to volunteer. They were all like, you know what? I want to do it. No, I want to do it. No, I want to do it. Actually, no. What happened was, verse 11, on hearing these words, Saul, who's the king, the leader, and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. And you would have been too if a 9.5-pound giant came down and threatened you. That's just what happens. And so this entire nation, this entire army who's come out for battle, right? And they're standing right at the front lines, and they hear this giant. They all become terrified and afraid. And the reason is, they start looking, and they're like, you know what? The natural thing for us to do, we need our leader, who is Saul. He's going to take care of this for us. So they waited. They stood there. And they waited on Saul, their king, who was supposedly the strongest and the biggest soldier they had. Matter of fact, the reason that he was picked as king is because he was tall and he looked the part of a warrior and a king. And so they were waiting on him to come and do something about this giant who came down and threatened them. And so they wait, and they wait, and they wait. With every moment that they wait, his credibility begins to wane a little bit. And the army of Israel made an incredible mistake here. They put their hope and their trust in their king named Saul. And this is where the story that we're reading kind of intersects with my story and your story a little bit. Because this is what I know to be true about you. This is what I know to be true about me. It's that we place our hope in what we depend on. We place our hope in what we depend on. Or, to say it a different way, sometimes we place our hope in who we depend on. That's true of you and that's true of me. For example, sometimes we place our hope in our job or our money or a person. We place our hope in our own ability to be able to accomplish things. That's just a natural part of life. We place our hope in what we depend on. Now, this whole nation, this whole army had placed all their hope in their king named Saul. Let me ask you a question. What happens when that thing that you've placed your hope in or your trust in lets you down? Goes away and you can no longer depend on it anymore. Well, a couple things happen. One, you can become very angry. You can become very frustrated. And I think that the nation of Israel kind of experienced that a little bit. They got really frustrated. They became really angry. They were like, why is this our king not coming to bail us out? He should have already been here, because they were depending on him completely to do that. And then the other thing is we can become very fearful. We can become very afraid of what's going to happen next. If that thing that we were completely counting on, that thing that we're depending on, for example, if you lost your job and had no income and had no money, you become very fearful in that moment about what's going to happen. And that's happened to some of us before, right? You become very fearful because that thing that you were counting on, that you were depending on, that you were putting your hope and your trust in is suddenly gone. And that's what is happening to the nation of Israel, the army of Israel this day. They had placed all their hope and all their trust in their king. And he is conspicuously absent and terrified like everybody else. Now the problem is that their mistake wasn't just on this battlefield. It actually happened years before this, that they started down this track of placing their hope in the wrong place, misplacing their trust. It started a few years before this when, you may have heard me say this before, you may have heard somebody say this before, when they actually decided that they wanted a king. Saul was their first king, right? There was a time that God had set Israel up to be something completely different than any other place in the entire world. God had set Israel up to be a theocracy, meaning a place where he was the king, he was the God, he was in charge. He was the single one. And that he was going to appoint judges, or they were going to appoint judges, and these judges were going to administer the law. So God gave the law. The law was was supposed to be perfect, and these judges were going to administer the law. That's the way that God set up this system, and he told them, I'm giving you a promise that if you will keep this system, I will bless you, and I will bless all the nations of the world through you. But they became very impatient. Does anybody in the room ever have a problem with impatience? Some of you are like, could raise my hand fast. Right? Yeah, I do too sometimes. We want what we want. We want it. And the nation of Israel began to be impatient. Because what they began to do is they began to see, okay, God, we understand that this is the way you set it up. Because God wanted them to be able to, when other nations saw them and saw their success and their wealth, God wanted them to be able to say, hey, how do you, when other nations came and said, how do you defend your border so well? They wanted to be able to say, you know what? The one true and living God fights for us. And when the other nations came and said, how do your crops grow every year? How do you avoid drought and famine? They would say, because the Lord our God is on our side, and he fights for us, and he's our king. He wanted that for Israel. He wanted desperately to be the place where they put their hope and their trust. But there was this moment where there was a prophet named Samuel. And Samuel was kind of God's messenger to the people. God spoke to Samuel, and Samuel spoke to the people for God. And there was this moment where Samuel started to get a little older, and he realizes, I'm not going to be able to do this much longer. And so he decides that he's going to appoint his sons as his replacements, which makes a lot of sense. He's going to make his sons do the job that he was doing. And that's where we pick up the story, where Israel really began to make this mistake. And it's found just a few chapters before this whole Goliath story, in 1 Samuel chapter 8. If you have your Bible, if not, we'll put it up on the screen. It says this: when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. The name of the firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. This is not who you want leading your nation. And so all the elders of Israel, they gathered together, and they came to Samuel at Ramah. And they said to him, you are old. Well, that's not all they said to him. They said, it's a horrible way to start this conversation. And your sons do not follow your ways. So what we want you to do is now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. In other words, Samuel, we know that you hear from God, and what we want you to do is we want you to make us, even though God made us special, God made us unique, God made us different, we want you to make us like everybody else. We want somebody or something that we can place our hope and our trust in. And Israel on this day made a terrible, terrible mistake. But check out what happens. Samuel begins to get a little upset about this. He begins to get a little offended by this. Verse 6. But when they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord. And the Lord told him, listen to all the people are saying to you. It is not you who they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. Pivotal moment in the history of Israel. And as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now, listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. In other words, if you have a king, I want you to understand what's going to happen. He's going to want land, and he's going to want the best land, and he's going to take it from some of you. He's going to want taxes. He's going to tax you on your crops and on your livestock. He's going to take the best that you have. He's going to draft your sons into the army if you have a king. And in spite of all those warnings, guess what Israel did? They voted to have a king, not God, appointed to them. And that king was Saul. And on that day, they placed their hope and their trust in him. And it altered the course of the whole nation forever. But it does give us this narrative that we're going to be learning over the next several weeks about David that we would not have had if Israel hadn't requested a king the way that they did. And so David, who becomes king later, we'll come back to the story. If you don't know what happened to Goliath, we'll get there, I promise. But David would become king, and he would live his life in a different way than every other king around him, than every other king of Israel. He believed and he loved the law of God. He was kind of a different kind of person, a different kind of king. Most kings don't love the laws. Matter of fact, sometimes when kings would break laws, they would change laws to make the law that they just broke legal. Right? And so that they kind of became the law. They became the law. And David was very different. He understood God's law. And even in the moments where David was incredibly imperfect, and David was incredibly imperfect, he had several big instances where he was imperfect. Even if you're not a churchgoer, you can probably name one of those instances. And even in those moments, he never forgot who God was and who the true king of Israel was. And even in those moments, he understood where his place was. And that his place was not the king, that was God's place. And he led his life that way. Now, before he becomes king, though, we need to determine how he became, first, this kind of mighty warrior. So to go back to the original story, David is 15 years old or so at this point in time. And he decides that he's going to take a care package to the battlefield. He couldn't even drive himself there. He just got the learner's permit. And he takes himself, and he takes this care package from his parents to his older brothers who are in the army, and he gets there and he notices something about the army. This is where we left the story. Verse 11, on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. That's kind of where this has been left. And for 30 days or so, Goliath has come out and he's chanted these things twice a day, and everybody is still terrified of him. David, he gets to the front of the line. He sees nobody's fighting, and he finds his brothers, and he hears these words that Goliath uses. David acts so different than everybody else in the army, than all these soldiers, than all these veteran warriors. David gets up there, and they were all dismayed or frustrated or terrified. You know what David was? He was offended. He would fit in really well in our culture. He was greatly offended at what Goliath was saying. He said, whoa, what is happening here? And he began to ask questions that nobody else was asking. Check out the question that David asked in verse 26. David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? And I think that the men standing there were like, disgrace? What are you talking about? We're not disgracing Israel. We disgrace. I see a 9.5-foot giant who wants to kill us, but I don't see disgrace. But David saw it very differently than everybody else saw it. He saw it from a different perspective. He started with a different assumption. He said this. He said, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Nobody had asked that question. Nobody was wondering that. And what he meant by uncircumcised is that he was outside of the covenant of God. He was outside of the protection of God. He was not fighting for God's army. And so David was wondering, you've got this guy who comes down every single day and defies us, defies you, defies God. Why hasn't anybody shut him up yet? It was a good question, and nobody had an answer for it. But word gets back to King Saul, who's hiding up in the tent somewhere, afraid to come down. He gets word that somebody is actually thinking about volunteering to go and fight Goliath. And I bet Saul gets a little excited. He's like, yes, it doesn't have to be me. That's wonderful. And he calls for this guy, this soldier to come in. And David, the 15-year-old shepherd, walks in. I guarantee you Saul looked at him and was like, nope. Don't think so. And right as Saul was getting ready to dismiss David, David stopped it and said, listen, I want you to understand something. I may just be a shepherd, and I may not be one of your soldiers. I want you to understand, not long ago, there was a lion that came and tried to attack one of my sheep. And every other shepherd in this moment, when a lion comes to attack their sheep, they would have just let that one sheep go, and they would have taken the rest of the sheep to safety. He said, not me. Not me. What I did was I went after that sheep. I rescued it, and I killed the lion. And then he said, not long after that, there was a bear that did the exact same thing. He took a sheep, And every other shepherd would just let that sheep go, but not me. I went after the bear, and I killed the bear. Anybody have a similar experience? A couple of you? Yeah, right. I said bear, not cat. Okay. Now, here's the thing, King Saul. I know that you look at me, and I want to tell you that you look at me and you see small, insignificant, can never defeat Goliath. But, verse 36, your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because, not because of my strength, not because of my ability, not because I'm the bravest warrior, the strongest warrior, no, but because he has defied the armies of the living God. And I want to tell you something this morning. That David went down, and he had this assumption about his life that changed the course of the nation of Israel. This was a pivotal moment. They were about to be enslaved again. And David started with an assumption that nobody else started with. He started with a principle for his life that nobody else started with. And that assumption is something that I want to make sure that we all walk away with. And if you, whatever you're facing in your life, whenever a giant comes before you or an obstacle gets in your way, if you will start with this assumption, it will change everything for you. And that assumption was this: the man or woman whose hope is in the Lord need not fear. Say it again. The man or woman whose hope is in the Lord need not fear, even when there is something to be afraid of. Because, not because of our strength, not because of our ability, but because we put our hope in God. And you guys probably know how the story goes, but before we end it, I can imagine David going down, and he's about to face this giant. And David later in his life would reflect on a lot of these stories, a lot of these instances, and he would go back and he would write psalms or songs or poems about what he had faced. And there was this one that he wrote, and I kind of wonder if he had kind of written this about this exact moment. And it's found in Psalm 25, verses 1 through 5. It says this. It says, "In you, Lord my God, I put my trust. I trust in you. Do not let me be put to shame, nor let my enemies triumph over me. Because no one who hopes in you will ever be put to shame. Show me your ways. Lord, teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me. For you are my God, my Savior, and my hope is in you all day long." So this is the posture that David took down to the valley with him and took with him for the rest of his life. And he went on to become a legendary king, a legendary leader. And he did it with this assumption that you could put your trust in God and have no fear for whatever giants or obstacles you may be facing. And the story goes like this. That David went down to the valley, saw Goliath, and waited for the taunts. Then he stood before Goliath. And you could imagine, as David's walking down, and both sides of the camps, right? I mean, you got the Philistine side and the Philistine from this side. Philistine side of the camp, when they see David walk down, the looks of confusion, and then the laughter that may have broken out, right? And the high five, yay, they're going to be our slaves, right? And then also on the Israel side, you can see the looks of confusion, right? And then the sadness and the crying and the depression that may have broken out. Great, we're going to be their slaves. And David goes and he stands in front of Goliath. And he says, "You have defied the armies of Israel, and you have not just defied us, but you have defied God, the living, one true God. And let me tell you what's going to happen here today, Goliath. I'm going to strike you down, not with my strength, not with my ability, but because God will be fighting for me. And I will feed your carcass to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And then he struck him down in that moment. And he instantly became the most popular person in all of Israel. And Facebook requests just kept coming in. And changed cell phone numbers and everything. What happened next? The nation, the Philistine nation, they got so scared of David that he became such a strong warrior in their eyes that they actually left and they retreated and they started to run. And that was a huge tactical mistake because Israel followed them and the slaughter lasted all day long. All because one kid came in with the assumption that instead of trusting in Saul or his own abilities, that he could put his trust in the Lord and that he had nothing to be afraid of, even when there was something to be afraid of. And it changed everything. And so his posture essentially was this. I want you to help me out with this. In you, Lord my God, I put my trust, my hope is in you all day long. Let's read that together. I want to make sure that we understand this. This can be the lens from which we view our entire life. It says this. Read it with me.
In you, Lord my God, I put my trust. My hope is in you all day long.
And if you will live with that assumption, that whatever giant you face, whatever storm you face, whatever trial you face, whatever obstacle is trying to get in your way and keep you down, if you can operate with the assumption that my hope isn't in anything, and we put our hope in a lot of different things, but my hope is in you all day long. Whatever you're facing, God will be there. I asked a couple people in the band to come back up, and they're going to sing a song that you guys probably know or have heard if you've been around here for any time at all. You can feel free to sing it with us, or you can kind of just let the words wash over you a bit. But David was writing at another place, and he said, Lord, you are my refuge, my shelter in time of storm, in time of need. And so we're going to sing a song that kind of highlights what David was writing. And as you hear these words, just think of whatever situation you're facing, whatever you're going through, know that you can place your hope in God as your refuge. Listen to the words of this song.
Oh, my Father, you are
quickly, I want us to stand and I want us to read together Psalm 25 one more time. And just let this be the posture and the assumption that you start your week with. Help me out. In you, Lord my God, I put my trust. I trust in you. Do not let me be put to shame, nor let my enemies triumph over me. No one who hopes in you will ever be put to shame. Show me your ways, Lord. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth. For you are my God, my Savior, and my hope is in you all the day long. Let that be your posture this week for the rest of your life. Have a great day, and we will see you back next Sunday, 9:30 a.m.